Welcome to today's IG English live lesson. It's getting closer to the October-November exams. So this month, I would like to concentrate on going through some candidate sample responses and some of the comments that examiners make to these responses so that you get a better idea of what examiners are looking for. So we're going to work through a paper 2 IG sample candidate response and a paper 3 IG sample candidate response over the next month. So for September is all focusing on the kinds of answers students have produced to typical exam questions. Okay, and welcome to those of you who have just joined. Right, let me share my screen with you. This is the one I want. Yes. Okay, so let's have a look. This candidate response, I think I've told you before, you can find this online for yourselves. Just type in the keywords IGCSE English 0500 example candidate responses booklet, and it should pop up in your browser. Okay. So we do not do the core paper. What we focus on is the paper 2 and the paper 3. And paper 2 is all about reading passages. Okay, so today we're going to focus on a sample reading passage and how a student answered their question, how they structured their question and what they wrote. Let's make this a little bit bigger so you can see what's going on. I'll also just, sorry, I just did something very silly there. I will also just bring out the chat box in case you want to make comments or you have questions as we go through the work. Okay. All right, so this is one of the samples that was given. It's a paper 2 question, obviously, and it's divided into 2 parts, but because we're restricted for time, I'm only going to look at part 1 today. So let's read through the text that was provided, and I want you to pay attention to the character traits of this person, Aunt Peg. Okay, pay attention to her character traits, keep them in mind, and so things will make more sense when we go through the candidate's sample answer. Right, so bear with me whilst I read this to you. Aunt Peg. Our parents were overindulgent towards us, and we were happy, but not particularly well-behaved children. Maybe they felt guilty because on one occasion, they had to leave home for 2 weeks on business and invited our Aunt Peg to look after us. She accepted the challenge eagerly. Vile Aunt Peg, leering, sneering, peering Aunt Peg. We would be enjoying a friendly fight, or just sitting doing nothing, when she would pounce on us like a cat, and savage retribution would follow. As we stood in the corner of the room with hands on our heads, she would snarl, "How dare you, making my tidy room messy, wasting your time. I saw you." Aunt Peg had eyes on sticks. How she saw us, we never knew. One moment she wasn't there, the next she was on top of us. She was a wizened, tiny woman of great muscular strength and energy, and her mouth was like an upside-down new moon without the hint of a smile. She constantly spoke of her philosophy of life, but we only experienced the superficial features of it. She kept us occupied at all times, sweeping the yard, tidying the house, and learning to cook tasteless, crumbling cakes. On the first day, she blew a whistle to order us downstairs to a breakfast of chewy, sugarless oat cereal. The sugary, salty foods we loved were locked away, and eating our morning bowlful was a lonely marathon. If we didn't eat it all up, we were given extra cleaning to do. By day 2, we were very mournful children. Nostalgia set in as we remembered our happier past. We went about our daily tasks like little zombies. We became uncommunicative and even forgot, to our aunt's extreme pleasure, to insult each other. Both of us longed for the day when our dear parents would return and unlock the barred doors of our prison. On day 3, we were introduced to our educational program. She set us impossible mental arithmetic sums at tremendous speed and always finished with, "And 29, add them all together and take away the number I first said." Then there was reading improvement, which consisted of moral tales from the 19th century, and practical farm work, which mostly involved the identification and eradication of weeds. We were not allowed to re-enter the house until we had successfully whispered the name of the plant into Aunt Peg's good ear. If we did not use the official Latin name, she would snap at us. "You wicked child, it is certainly not hairy stinkweed. I'll not have swearing in my house." Okay, let's move down. Of course, we attempted to break free. It happened on a visit to town while we were carrying the heavy bags with Aunt Peg marching behind, tapping her walking stick like an officer in the army. At a mutual sign, we dropped the bags and ran for it. Our aunt seemed prepared for this. She blew her whistle and shouted, "Stop thief!" And we were painfully restrained by several burly members of the public. When we reached home, we were given a stern lecture on philosophy and morals and sent to bed with just a slice of bread, some cheese, and a lettuce leaf. We hated lettuce. Apparently, much of Aunt Peg's philosophy was connected with diet. She must have thought that we were lazy, naughty children who needed strong routine and discipline to prevent the rot from setting in. How we cried with joy when our smiling parents returned, bearing presents and hugging us tight. Okay, so any first impressions of Aunt Peg? What would you say your impression of Aunt Peg is from this extract that we've read? And thank you for letting me know, Yona. Don't worry. Welcome. What is your impression of Aunt Peg? She's a very educated lady. Oh, interesting. That's a positive response. Strict but effective. Yes, you're right. She's strict, but she's effective. She's getting, she's getting some discipline instilled into the children. She's very educated. Do you think she's harsh? She'd have made a good sergeant. Absolutely. Yes, I agree. A good army sergeant. Okay, yes, she is harsh. She's strict, but maybe that's what these children needed. But it's very hard to tell exactly what's going on because obviously this is from the children's point of view. So we don't quite really know. So bear all of this in mind when you approach these kind of questions. Number one, for the reading passage, the first question is that you have to imagine you are Aunt Peg. After 1 week of looking after the children, you write a letter to their parents in which you give your impressions of the children, give an account of your progress with them so far, tell your plans for the next week. So remember, when you get these kind of questions, we always divide them into 3 bullet points. And you have to make sure that the answer you give fulfills each of these criteria in order to get a high mark. Okay. So you have to pretend you're Aunt Peg. You have to give your impressions of the children. So now it would be from Aunt Peg's perspective. You would give an account of your progress with them so far. And then you would tell your plans for the next week. Write your letter. So remember, try and stick to a letter format. There should be an introduction to the person you're addressing the letter to. So, dear whoever, base it on what you have read in passage A. You should write between 1.5 and 2 sides, allowing for the size of your handwriting. So it's quite a long letter. It's not that short, 1.5 to 2 pages long. And this would be out of 20 marks, but that 20 marks is made up of 15 marks, which count for the content. In other words, have you paid attention to the details in the extract so that you can reproduce those ideas in your letter? And then up to 5 marks for the quality of your writing. Grammar, sentence structure, spelling, punctuation, all of these things will also earn you marks if you use them correctly. Okay, so that's the first thing you'd have to do. And then the number 2, you'd have to reread the descriptions of Aunt Peg and the children, and then you would select words and phrases from these descriptions and explain how the writer has created effects by using language. So that would be the second part. And in fact, there'll be a third part as well. There'll be a summaries part, but that relates to part 2 of this particular past paper. So I don't have time to look into that. But generally, you'll have 3 questions in your paper 2 that you have to address. Okay. So let's look at how the candidate did this first part where it's writing the letter, what the candidate managed to produce under a time limit. Okay, dear parents, now we know that they are writing a letter. After receiving the invite, oh, okay, sorry, a question has just come through before I go into this. The question is there a word limit for the writer's effect now? Oh, for the second question here. They don't provide you with one. So no, there's not. But remember, you're under time limit. So I would, as long as whatever words and phrases you decide to pull out, and don't do too many, just do the strongest ones that jump out at you. As long as you explore them fully, you should be fine. But no, there's no word limit given here. Good question. Dear parents, after receiving the invite, I cannot describe to you how very privileged I felt to finally have the opportunity of spending some valuable time with your children. So this is interesting. It's quite polite sounding, this opening. And this word privilege stands out, and valuable time. And this is good because remember, we're trying to convey the idea that the aunt is educated. Okay, she's very learned. However, when I arrived at your home, I immediately realized the enormity of the task. It is a good job I was prepared for this. Otherwise, I would hate to think how very differently your children would have behaved throughout the week. I do not understand why children of this age would want to treat each other so badly. I have to admit, I had some trouble on the first day stopping them from fighting with each other or grabbing one another. I soon found the solution to this problem, as I always do. The key to preventing them from harming each other was to promote teamwork, and I was able to do this by keeping them busy and occupied at all times. Notice how she turns the things that she does into some very sensible ideas, some positive things, which in the children's perspective, they certainly weren't positive, they were very negative. Okay. We all know how much housework there is to do, so from day one, I requested all hands on deck, and I was very pleasantly surprised to see them all get on with the work without a single complaint. They were a tremendous help when it came to cooking and cleaning. They became so focused and concentrated on what they were doing, it was almost as if they had lost the ability to communicate with each other. I also believe that they benefited greatly from the educational program I introduced, although on one occasion they did plan a great escape. But again, I was expecting something like this to happen and was able to deal with it. Notice all this blanketed revelation. She never fully reveals what's going on here. I am delighted to say that as the week progressed, the children became less violent towards each other and became more aware of their tasks and how to approach them. I was fortunate enough to see significant improvements in the form of the cooking, the cleaning, and their treatment of each other and also of me. It seems as though they realized that my expectations were simply going to be beneficial to them, and they accepted this gracefully. Look how different her explanation is of things compared to the child's explanation of things. However, I am slightly disappointed in you as parents, as I feel that they are treated with too much respect and not enough discipline. I would perhaps have used the word leniency here, when you are lenient, okay? Leniency, right? So, if it wasn't for my watchful eye, who knows where they could have disappeared off to on our trip to town. This coming week, I plan to catch up on all of the housework I was unable to complete, should have been this last week. So now going into the future plans for the coming week, there is a house to clean, a garden to keep intact, and animals to feed. I also plan to pay you a visit and see how the children are getting on. Okay, so that's a bit strange because she's supposed to be there for 2 weeks, so why would she visit the parents to see how the children are getting on? I'm sure she means later on after they return, but anyway. Yours sincerely, Aunt Peg. Okay, so notice sticking to the convention of a letter in a very simplistic way. It doesn't have to be overly complicated with addresses and things. It's really the content that they want you to focus on. Let's have a look at the examiner's comment here. The letter develops ideas relating to the first two bullets. This third section is weaker than looking towards the next week. However, being brief and vague, and there is little reference throughout to specific detail. The quality of the writing is high, it is fluid and well sequenced, and includes a range of mature and appropriate vocabulary, such as the enormity of the task, all hands on deck, and accepted this gracefully, which conveys a strong voice for the character, and I would agree with that. So yes, just remember that once you've produced your writing, you need to always budget time for editing. You go back and you make sure that you have answered those bullet points fully, each of them, given enough attention so that it's kind of, it equals out in some way. Okay. So she did look at the impressions of the children. She gave an account of progress so far, and then touched briefly on what was going to be next week's plan. That's the kind of thing you'd have to produce to get 15, which is quite good. 15 out of 20, that's not bad at all. Okay, for that first section. Now let's look at the second bit, where you would have to reread the descriptions of Aunt Peg in paragraphs 2 and 3, and then the children in paragraph 5. So you'd have to have a response for A and a response for B. And what are you actually doing? Well, you're selecting words and phrases from these particular descriptions, and you're explaining how the writer has created effect by using those particular words. In other words, why has the writer chosen those words, and how are they used to convey an idea? And if we look back at the extract, paragraphs 2 and 3, certain words stick out, like vile, leering, sneering, peering, pounce on us like a cat. What is that? What device is used there? For those of you who know it, please let me know. Savage retribution. Okay, retribution is punishment, but it's not just your everyday punishment, it's savage punishment. It's harsh. Okay. Yes, this is a simile. Good. All right, so she would pound someone like a cat. It was quite violent sounding. And she would snarl. Usually animals snarl, don't they? So this is animalistic. How dare you, making my tidy room messy, wasting your time. That's interesting that she sees things from this perspective, because now you're just going to have to clean it up. In other words, I saw you. She has eyes on sticks. Does she literally have eyes on sticks? No. This is a comparison, comparing her eyes as though they were on sticks since she can see everything. This is a metaphor. How she saw us, we never knew. One moment she wasn't there, the next she was on top of us. She was a wizened, clever, tiny woman of great muscular strength and energy. So there's no getting around her. There's no getting around her from a mental perspective, or possibly even from a perspective, physical perspective. And her mouth was like an upside down new moon without the hint of a smile. So no friendliness, no leeway here. She is strict, right? That's paragraphs 2 and 3. And then the children in paragraph 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here's the paragraph we have to look at for the children. Oh yeah, no, sorry, I've just done that wrong. Control Z. So these two are about Aunt Peg, and paragraph 5 is about the children. By day 2, we were very mournful children. Nostalgia set in as we remembered our happier past. We went about our daily tasks like little zombies. We became uncommunicative and even forgot, to our aunt's extreme pleasure, to insult each other. Both of us longed for the day when our dear parents would return and unlock the barred doors of our prison. Yet another metaphor. So creating imagery through devices like this. Okay, so these are the paragraphs you'd have to focus on. Let's have a look at what this candidate wrote in response to that. 2A. The writer uses powerful words and phrases to describe the character of Aunt Peg in the second and third paragraphs. The verb vile is used to great effect to describe Aunt Peg. Vile is a word meaning that something is negative in its nasty and unbeneficial nature. Now, is vile a verb? That's point number one. Is vile a verb? Vile Aunt Peg. Can you say to vile? No, right. So this candidate did not get it right. What is vile here? What is it functioning as? An adjective. Good. So if you are going to point out things like this, make sure that you do it accurately, okay? So be aware of the things that you say and just double check that you're doing the right thing. The verb vile, say adjective, is used to great effect to describe Aunt Peg. Vile is a word meaning that something is negative in its nasty and unbeneficial nature. Personally, I associate the word vile with disturbing images, usually showing how disgusting a person or object can be. And here's the root of the word vile, it's disgusting. This depicts Aunt Peg's personality greatly and helps to create an effect in which we begin to dislike her and side with the children. Okay, that's quite an interesting observation to make, so I would agree with that. Also, the verb peering, yes, correct, that is a verb. The verb peering helps to create an ominous and uncomfortable effect. Peering means for someone's presence to be felt even at times where it is unwanted. I associate the verb peering with people or objects which are not necessarily desired at that moment, there's a bit of repetition here, but which are constantly evaluating your every action or movement. Again, this is effective in its context as it describes the character of Aunt Peg greatly and gives the impression that her presence can be felt wherever you are situated within the house. Okay, sorry. And here are some suggestions about, I'm just going to come to a suggestion now. Sorry, I'll read through the paragraph and then we'll come through the suggestion. Moreover, the word pounce is also used, and here you could identify it as a verb. It is a verb, to pounce. It's also used to great effect by the writer. To pounce means to forcefully jump on a person or object. I associate the verb pounce with creates or characters, I think she meant creatures, or he or she meant creatures or characters such as predators who have an overwhelming authority which can always be felt. This is used to great effect in the text as it portrays Aunt Peg's power and influence over the children. I just want to point one thing out because we're coming close to 5 minutes before the end of the lesson. I associate the verb blah, blah, blah. I associate the verb blah, blah, blah. This is not necessary. If you identify the verb, just say what it means. Don't be too verbose. Don't take forever and ever to get to your point. You are limited for time. There were other things that could have been brought in here. The unsmiling moon mouth and yeah, the fact that she doesn't smile, the downturned mouth like a half moon. Okay, now let's look at the children, the response to the children. The writer also uses extremely effective and influential language when describing the children. The children are described as being mournful in paragraph 5. Yes, that is the first word that sticks out. Mournful is a word used to express strong feelings or sentiments of loss, correct? Personally, I associate mourning with, this really isn't necessary. So you could say it connotes, it carries connotations of it, or it connotes disturbingly sad images such as the loss of a close or loved one. This use of strong language or emotive language, something that moves the emotions, once again shows the control and influence the commanding Aunt Peg has on the children. That's a lovely adjective there. She is very commanding. This disturbing theme is continued in the paragraph as the children are described as being zombies. Notice that this writer does not pick up on the fact that that's used in a simile. Children are described as being zombies, which mean that they have a lack of life, soul, and targets to which they can work towards. I associate zombies with creatures or objects with a lack of purpose. This is effective as it portrays the use, or it is portrayed to use the unhappiness of the children. This image is further supported by the fact that the children are described as uncommunicative. That's interesting, making that link between the zombies and being uncommunicative. meaning for someone to be physically unable to express their feelings or opinions. Again, this shows the enormity of the authority that Aunt Peg has over the children. Okay, so let's have a look at the examiner's response to this. The response demonstrates a close focus on individual words. Some of the meanings and attempted effects are rather labored and imprecise, as in the explanation of peering. Section B is more convincingly expressed, the second paragraph. However, and overall, there is sufficient evidence of an ability to select relevantly and to explain how language works for a top band 2 mark. So they didn't get a higher mark than band 2, they got an 8 out of 10. Whereas perhaps if they had been a bit more precise and a bit more concise in the way that they describe things, they could have gotten probably a 10 if they'd identified those main key features. Okay. Okay, interesting. So some suggestions coming through here about the fact that the aunt is not necessarily vile, she's just a proper lady, and that she has standards, and the children don't have those standards. Correct. And then also the suggestion that the writer should have used the word machines rather than zombies. I know what you're saying, but if you look in that paragraph, you'll see that they use the word zombies. So you would have to try and, you're isolating those words from the section, okay? So I know why you wanted to use machines, because they go about their tasks in that robotic way. But here, because they use those words zombies, it's probably, you must replicate that in your answer, okay? Here's another observation. It seems that the aunt's rules and tasks were good for the children, yes, but the way she went about it was very harsh and quite mean. I agree. I wouldn't want to be those children, okay? But yes, she is doing it for their own good, ultimately. Okay, then let's have a look at the overall comment of this student's exams. This is a more than competent script, and remember, we haven't looked at the summaries that they were required to do. We'll look at that next week. This is a more than competent script which has benefited from planning by the candidate to give a coherent structure to each of the responses. Yes, it's quite apparent that the candidate planned what they were going to say, even if it was just quickly writing down keywords. Everything was quite methodical. More concision of expression, so express yourself more plainly, more clearly and concisely, would have allowed more material to be used in the time and space allowed. So let me just look at some of the comments coming through here. Oh, was I the one that marked this? No, this is a Cambridge booklet that they produce, and that they show you, just to give you some samples, show you the kind of thing that examiners, the kind of comments examiners make. So not me, this is not me, it's some other examiner. I'm not an examiner for Cambridge. So let's see, it seemed that the aunt's rules and tasks were good for the children. Yes, okay, sorry, I've read that one. Okay, so we've come to the end of the lesson. If you need to get hold of this booklet, look it up online. Like I say, you just type in those keywords and you can have a look at this more closely in your own time. Okay. So yes, overall, this person got an A for their answer, and I do think they expressed themselves very well. They do definitely express themselves well. I think their section 2 could have been a bit better. But yes, they got an A, 38. All right. So something to aspire to, everybody. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me.